Welcome everyone to another session of the Product Management Executive Insights session. We have a pretty large group of people, it's actually a record largest group of folks. My name is Raphael, I'm from Peak Product. Peak Product is the brand and the holding company of a lot of product management related activities, the Product Management Festival and other things, but I'm going to explain that in a moment. So why are we here today? We're actually here to share insights on the intersection of product management and the business sphere. So for context, we have the Product Management Festival, we have other activities, and often we talk about the functional advancement of product leads. Like you're a good PM and you want to be an even better PM, right? You want to advance functionally. This specific series is about the intersection of the executive domain and the product leadership domain. So specifically, when PM folks, leave the purely functional sphere and start to be exposed to the wider business topics, right? And this, for example, this could be joining boards, this could be joining management teams, this could be basically taking on a business responsibility as a product lead, right? There's almost this trend right now to say some of the PMs are becoming the general managers in the company, and that's a big deal, So we want to shed light on that intersection, and what is some advice some folks have made this transition? How are others looking at this transition? Basically, what we all can learn from that, right? So it's about getting those exclusive insights by interviewing, senior folks from tech companies, but also, like in this case, from actually executive search, and they're going to have a very interesting view on this. And really, the point is to enrich the context for you and for others. If you are about, to enter this or leave this purely functional career and go into the wider business career. I mentioned a few other initiatives just to complete the picture. There's many other things that Peak Product does, and I'm just going to briefly touch on them. There's a big Trends and Benchmark newsletter and study. I would highly recommend you download it. It's sort of a level set of the whole industry. We have the famous Product Management Festival that we run in Zurich and Singapore every year with thousands of participants. We have local PM nights in many cities all over the globe. We have exec circles. By the way, this is also a group that is making this transition where, we often discuss topics like this. And we have the INSEAD program. This is a collaboration with INSEAD where we invite senior PM folks on an executive program. It's a one-week program to grow as functional lead, but also grow as overall business lead. Quickly about myself. Actually, before we go to me, since I mentioned the conference, in case you or somebody on your team or somebody that wants to join the conference this year, and I hope you all do. We did it in person last November, and it was so cool to all be in a big room together in a conference room. You can get 25% off if you add the discount code Discount Executives without brackets. If you enter that, and you can use it for yourself, but you can pass it on. So that gives you a discount on that. Quickly about myself. So I'm your host today. My name is Raphael. I co-founded Peak Product, the brand and the holding company of all those initiatives. And before that, I've been a senior director of product at Google. I've been a long time at Google where I ran Google Maps, where it was a tiny product in 2008 to a multi-billion user product. And then I ran Google Shopping, was the merchant PM lead for Google Shopping, which is Google's e-commerce business, and helped grow it from single-digit billion to two-digit billion. And I've been a CEO and an angel investor in over 100 companies, right? And right now, I'm actually this is my focus. I'm now exclusively working on really, this topic, advancing PM topics, and help me grow and help the community grow. With that, I want to move on and actually introduce our two exciting guests today. And like I said, it's a very, very telling and interesting perspective we're going to hear today. And I had many conversations with them before this. It's Anna and Mark from Egon Zehnder. They're going to introduce themselves in a moment. But what I really like about them, because they're doing executive search, they really have a finger on the pulse of this trend from functional career to a business career, and what is going well, what is a trending thing, but also what are the pitfalls, what have they seen, where we all should be a bit cautious. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Anna and Mark. And actually, maybe Anna, you start. Please, who are you? What are you doing? And please kick this
Hello,
off.
everyone. Thanks for having us, Raphael. This is really just such a pleasure. It's our favorite topic, as you know. We've been having lots of side conversations in advance. So I'm Anna Auerbach, based out of the New York office of Egon Zehnder. I live in our tech practice and I co-lead our product officer practice, which I will admit is a kind of new thing for us. It took us a bit of time as a firm to wrap our head around product. And we'll talk a little bit about why this product does take so many different forms. But it's a real pleasure of my work. Probably about half my time is spent on product roles and roles sort of related to product. Prior to joining Egon Zehnder, I was actually a startup founder and CEO. I launched and led a HR tech SaaS solution, ultimately sold, so that was exciting. An earlier career in consulting. Live in New York, as I shared, have two little kids that thankfully are making it through okay through COVID, but it's wonderful to be with all of you. And I'll hand it off to Mark to say hello as well.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Raphael, again, and really fantastic to be here. My name is Mark. I'm based in the Berlin office of Egon Zehnder, where I lead our digital practice in the EMEA region, where we work with startups, with scale-ups, and also with more traditional or mature companies. And just a very brief intro on Egon Zehnder, as you might ask, like what does his name and firm stand for? So we were founded by Egon in 1964 in Zurich. Today we operate in 40 countries globally as trusted advisors to our clients on all talent and leadership related matters, which means leadership advisory as well as exec search. And we see both as strongly intertwined, as every senior hire is actually a team intervention. And while we have experts in various areas, we believe it's really important that we combine both areas in order to add the highest value. Enough about the firm. Just a little bit of personal background. I joined the firm over 10 years ago with a focus on tech digital startups. We worked in the space before, actually, from the first .com boom, but not with that strong of a focus and not out of Berlin. This changed tremendously since then, and we have grown the practice sector-wise and also, as Anna mentioned, functionally adding product or CPO practice next to our tech officer practice. Before joining the firm, I did a variety of things based on my two main areas of passion and interest since my university time, one being digital tech and the other being China. At the beginning of my career, I co-founded a company advising European companies going to China. Then I moved to tech M&A, which brought me back to digital and technology. And then I realized that one of my biggest interests has always been people. And with joining Egon Zehnder, I had the chance to combine these two passions of technology and people. And I personally get a lot of energy out of working in product and with product managers, product officers. So I look very much forward to our next hour spent together here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. By the way, in terms of structure, we're going to talk for about 25 minutes. I'm going to interview Anna and Mark. Then we're going to open up the floor for questions, and I'm going to come to this in a moment. And also, by the way, this is recorded. So just that you know, we're going to share this later on. Also, you can forward it to others, but just that everybody knows it's recorded. Great. So let's dive right into this. So, and maybe I'll ask this straight to Anna. General thoughts on the product role, like from an executive search perspective. Where does it stand? What do you observe? What do your folks do with regards to product leaders?
Oh, this is our favorite topic. And I already teased that, product is a little bit messy, and that's why it took us a bit of time as a firm to wrap our heads around it. So listen, product is so interesting because it can take so many different forms. I think we often talk about the fact that product is the intersection of what's technically feasible and what's commercially viable. but that simplicity sort of belies a lot of complexity under the surface. And so I think what's been interesting to see is the different forms product can take. I mean, I think years ago, we saw sort of the beginnings of product, certainly in software for a while, but then in other industries in the form of digital leaders, digital officers. We saw this, I think, a lot in media early on. And now there's just so many different interesting forms. So we're seeing sort of trends towards CPTOs that include technology and more, I would say, technical fluency than just technical literacy. But then there's also this push towards more commercially oriented customer experience product leaders. So what's interesting is there's so many different forms, and in some ways I feel like it is being a bit bifurcated as a role. And so for us, it's interesting. I was thinking about the other day when a colleague reached out to me. He was working with a client, and they were trying to craft a role. And he reached out and he said, Anna, I think I should pull you in because I don't understand the role, and that means it must be product. And I think that sort of underscores where this role is today, where it's sort of at this intersection of so many different things. And so for us as a firm, we put a stake in the ground in terms of creating a practice around this. We are constantly trying to stay close to the market, not just through our candidates, but in talking to thought leaders. So in the States, we partnered with a women in product organization. So for us, it's moving so quickly that we're just trying to constantly keep smart on this space. What we do ourselves is we do search work, obviously. We do a lot of advisory and helping clients figure out actually how they structure these organizations. This exact dynamic of, is it a little more technical? Is it more CPTO? Is it more commercially leaning? So we really help to figure out what might be the right structure, not just for today, but for tomorrow. We're doing a lot of thought leadership as well. So just perspectives from our client work, what we're seeing in the market. We're working on several research efforts around compensation, role structures, patterning in different industries. We're particularly fascinated by the idea that the idea of product is a little bit more straightforward in software companies or software-led companies, a little more complicated when you think about industrial. But we're seeing product leaders in railroads, right? And packaged goods. And so there's a really interesting dynamic there as well. So we're trying to figure out kind of what the best path forward is for us. And ultimately, we're trying to be responsive to the market, as you can tell. But with that, let me pause on that topic, because I think we could talk a lot about what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and Mark, maybe over to you. What's your thought on the role in executive hiring? How do actually hiring managers consider product leads today, maybe versus 10 years ago? What has changed? And by the way, anything, because Anna is in New York, you're in Europe, you're in Berlin, anything regionally different? Any observations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we looked at product 10 years ago, we didn't get any product searches, right? Because I think it was very new to the market. And then over the last 5 years, it was interesting because there were interests and requests from clients. And then we often said, well, actually what you're looking for is a product manager, but they couldn't name it. And I'm talking about Europe mainly, because what we also feel, if you look across Atlantic, is that we are still catching up in Europe. And I would say over the last 12, 24 months, the wave clearly arrived here. So the amounts of requests we now get from clients with regard to product roles is definitely, we can talk about exponential growth here. And that's new. And I think the interesting thing is now, and I think Anna touched on that already, is it takes to distinguish what kind of product manager is wanted and needed. For example, in a product build environment versus in a company like in an e-commerce company, where we see a lot of things happening right now, where it's more about working with standard tools rather than creating everything by yourself. So now it's the other way around. Now it's called product or CPO or VP product, etc. But we need to distinguish and define and work with the client together. What do they actually need? And is it a project manager coming from the likes of Google, right? Where I think it's a very defined role, very elaborated, there's a clear path, etc. Or are they looking more for GM-ish marketing profile? Just to touch on a few points, happy to go deeper in any of those.
Actually, I had one follow up on this one, maybe, Mark, because I remember the times when people were hiring CIOs, like information officer, or CTOs. How would you, if it's at all possible to generalize it, because I assume it's often very specific, but any thoughts on I don't know, hierarchies, or how people reflect on those roles now, how they relate? Does it make sense to hire all three, or CTO and CPO? Is there actually a mix of them?
I'm happy to start, Anna. Please, please chime in. I think we see with these letters, and I'm sure many here in the call will second that. We see all kinds of combinations, right? From CPOs to CTPOs, CDIOs, CTIO. I mean, we see everything now. And I think clients are, and I think what it actually reflects is the different states and organizational structures that clients have. So I think there is no right and wrong. It's just, it speaks about indirectly with the titles about the struggle they have to package it and to find the right way and to, I think on the one hand, fight the right tension, for example, between product and technology. And on the other hand, wanting with the combination, for example, of CTPOs, wanting the empowerment of the role. So I think we see many parallel trends. At least I would say that. And also in terms of hierarchy, as you touched upon, Raphael, I see now a trend where it becomes an equal partner in the C-suite, I would say, but it's existed, I think, in pure tech companies for a long time. We also see, I saw now more recently, product also owning marketing, for example, which I haven't seen a lot before. But so this just to mention a few things. Anna, maybe you see different things in the US.
No, so I think what's interesting is there's definitely sort of a maturity model to product. And I think just because of Silicon Valley, the US is like a hair ahead, but the other markets are catching up and may very well leapfrog. I think what's interesting is that all these titles are, like, I call them word salad, right? Because you're just assembling all these different acronyms together. What we encourage our clients, and frankly, I encourage job seekers the same thing, which is to figure out sort of the jobs to be done. Like what actually needs to get done? Where are the milestones? What are the success factors? And then let's package that together. Let's start with jobs to be done and package that into roles instead of trying to figure out, is it like CIO, CDAO, whatever it is, right? And then I think the gaps emerge right away. I think there is also sort of a maturity model, not just by market, but by digital maturity of the businesses, right? So I think digital transformation businesses more likely to have a CIO than a CTO. But the labels are not sufficient, right? I think it's important to figure out, like, where does engineering sit? Where does user experience sit? Where does product marketing sit? Product marketing is this hot debate of, is that a marketing function or is that a product function? So I think, the titles can be confusing, and I think it's because product can be so expansive and technology organizations can be so expansive. But I guess my 2 cents on the market is it's much more important to look at sort of jobs to be done and try to package those rationally than try to label things first off.
Yeah, maybe one follow-up that I just wonder personally, when you have, let's say you have a mandate, and you're talking to, I don't know, the CEO, maybe the board lead, and they call it a role, let's say that a technical lead, let's call him or her CTO, but then I wonder when you speak to them, have you had cases where you actually realize, yes, they call it a CTO, but actually you uncover, or actually you advise them, that could be the other thing, right? That actually what they maybe want is a leader, and a leader that takes sort of a product/user outcome perspective versus an implementation perspective. I mean, have you had those cases? Actually, I'm curious also about the advising part specifically. Do you happen to actually have conversations that go surprising ways, and have you changed search profiles? Have those things evolved by you reflecting the market with leaders?
All the time. I mean, I can jump in. I would say I have not had a single product search that ends up where we started, right? With who we're looking for, how is the role crafted, what is the mandate for the role, what do they own? I have not had a single one where
Wow.
that first call with a client where they're like, we think we need this person. You know, we
Wow.
always ask, like, who are you looking for? What are the gaps in the organization today? You know, kind of what do you need from a product leader? That's never where we end up. And it actually, it goes both ways. One is it can get repackaged. The other thing is I think sometimes organizations think they're ready for a product and they're not. And what they need is like a digital officer, or they need a program manager or project manager. And I think sometimes by doing the sort of new sexy label, for lack of a better term, organizations are trying to leapfrog a certain sort of digital maturity state of being that they're not quite at yet. And so I would say every product search takes some very surprising twists and turns. And the last thing I'll add to that is the same thing happens with candidates. So actually, I just was speaking with a candidate that I've gotten to know over the last year and a half. And he's mostly had chief digital officer titles. And so we had this very deep conversation yesterday of, as he goes to seek his next opportunity, what is the best way to position himself? Because digital and product are pretty much the same thing, right? But is he better off positioning himself as a product leader for digital transformation companies? Or is he a digital leader, right? And so there's not easy answers, but these are the types of conversations that we're having. I don't know, Mark, what would you say, particularly market-wise, if it's different? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would have, just to build on what you said, I think with the education of I think all kinds of clients about product and the different roles in digital and tech companies, we see also here in every project a discussion. And this also ended up being a couple of times when we're looking actually for a company leader, so a CEO, which again might be less surprising in the US, more surprising here, that we filled the CEO role actually with a product manager, the CPO, but the client didn't know in the beginning. So when we started the discussion with the client, they were either speaking about a technologist more generally, a general manager, etc. And then we can do is calibrate around profiles or archetypes, right? We speak, okay, so you want this kind of, and then we had a couple of instances where for a CEO role, we actually filled it with a product manager, but they've never named it this way. So that was, so it goes all ways in all directions.
And I'm just super curious about the dynamics of such a process, right? Just if I may be a bit curious on a personal level, I mean, how do those dynamics go? I mean, do you drive those conversations then? Because you have a hunch, this is probably what the company needs. Do you have always, I don't know, one ally or maybe the head of the board that you can kind of relate to or sort of discuss have side conversations? Because I mean, in this specific case where you switched from a CPO to the CEO hiring, I mean, maybe there was an existing CEO, or I don't know, but the specifics, we don't have to talk very specific, but I'm just curious, is it you driving this? Is this the board? Is this the CEO? How far do you personally go in those conversations?
No, absolutely. Again, happy to start. I think it can go all ways. So sometimes it's absolutely us, at least triggering the thought. And then it's about how can you steer a discussion within the C-level, the CEO, sometimes with the board, sometimes there's a technologist there who brings additional knowledge. And what we also did in the past, if it was too abstract for the client, we opened the door for real life conversations. So we, as Anna already said, I mean, we build up relationships for many years in the market. Sometimes it helps both sides, by the way. It helps candidates, it helps clients, firms to meet people or archetypes live that they exist, and they have a 1-hour discussion, and they meet 3 different archetypes or 4, and then we kind of put our heads together and say, so what resonated most with you, kind of, and if you could mix it, what would be the ideal mix? So that was proved helpful in some of the cases on some of the projects I worked on. But Anna, any additional viewpoints maybe?
No, it feels I think it's very similar dynamics actually, and I'm very excited to see a bit of this pathway that we've touched on of the CPO to CEO. I mean, we've seen it well trodden in software, but I think we're starting to see it in other spaces. And I think ultimately, if you're bringing together what's possible and what's viable commercially, then that is the role of a CEO fundamentally, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few years.
Yeah. Maybe the next question from my end. So if you, let's say you are in a business context, let's say you talk to a CEO who is not a product person or not a digital person, or maybe the board, but you're discussing product folks, and now maybe they meet those archetypes, or maybe you bring in candidates, right, and you moderate those conversations. I just wonder if you now put yourself in the shoes of the executives and of the non-product executives, how do they experience those product folks? What are some observations? Is this always going well? Are there misunderstandings? What's the dynamic there?
I think what I observe sometimes is there is often I think a leadership growth aspect. That's what I would call it. There might be, I think many are fantastic functional leaders, but because of the fact that product is sometimes not necessarily a big people leadership role, and because they're very collaborative, not every client is used to having this very, like say, collaborative and bringing together mindset. They want more determination, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I think there's sometimes a function of experience, leadership responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes I would say one observation on my end is you can't generalize, but a bit very humble and nice versus some clients would want to probably see maybe sometimes some even stronger determination and force here at hand. But again,
maybe more assertive people.
Yes, yes. So again, this is not to generalize completely, but that was the one observation I had over recent years. But might be very subjective. Maybe Anna has a different view.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we did a session last year with women product leaders, and the big hot topic was, what do you wish your CEO knew about the product role and about your own role? Like what's hard, what's challenging, what are the misconceptions? And I think what was interesting that we heard, and it's mirrored by what we hear from clients, is they just know they need to do product. They have no idea what product actually means, what it entails, and the process of creating a product roadmap, right? They think this is something that is just created. And actually, it's interesting. There was a question that came in around, product execs driving feature factories versus empowered product teams. Like that's the exact dynamic, right? Because I think many CEOs that have not grown up in sort of a software oriented, like agile product development environment, don't understand that we're going to start with user personas and user journeys. And like even these terms are completely foreign to many CEOs. And so it's more around, they're solving for, we need higher engagement on our platform, or we need like better conversion, right? And so that's what drives feature factors, or we need to like promote this thing, right? And so what's really interesting is that I think there's a little bit of a disconnect where, because it's funny, it's come full circle to where we started, which is product is a little bit of a black box for outsiders. And I think can take so many different forms that I think for leaders, they often misunderstand what product is, how it functions, and frankly, what resources it needs. One of the debates we had in that session was also around dedicated engineering. So it's a huge misconception that product does not need dedicated engineering. If you want to rapid prototype things, if you want to test things in market, product leaders need at least a small dedicated engineering team. And so that concept is kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around, because I think engineering sits here, product sits here. But there's some really interesting things because it's maturing so quickly that I think are still misunderstood around product, and that senior folks don't often understand about the product function.
One thing from my own experience, and from having obviously also talked to many product leaders, and also doing this interview series, by the way, one recurring theme I heard many times is sort of the PM lead understanding that by stepping up, he or she might inherit really large business and revenue responsibility, which is not necessarily the same thing as making a product successful, right? And I literally remember cases from friends or from others where I think they completely missed that part or gave it way too little weight in their executive journey, right? And sort of saw everything through a product lens. And that's, I would consider personally like a typical pitfall in making this step, right? Because, yeah, please.
Yeah, what you don't want, and we've seen a couple of times, is accountability for revenue without ability to harness resources, right? What you don't want is the P&L product leader that has no ability to actually amass resources and control sort of the actual strategy. And it's interesting, I think we're starting to see when companies split into business units, often it's been a GM, right, leading a business unit. We're starting to see product leaders lead those business units, particularly in software-driven organizations. The catch is, and it feels like sort of for many product leaders, taking on a P&L is the logical next step. That's fine. You just don't want only the revenue side of the P&L.
Okay,
you don't want to be just accountable for the growth side of things without having the ability to grow resources to this exact point around like engineering teams, right? You're going to need resources to scale up your team and control over the cost centers as well in order to actually be accountable for the revenue upside.
Yeah, but isn't there almost a little bit of an irony in this that like if you're back to GM, then actually you're not talking about product per se. So
they're going to merge back together. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think and also what I'm hearing between the lines is really clarity, right? It sounds like whatever the final setup is, it needs to be very clear for the organization and for the candidates what the key metrics are, what the desired outcomes are, and what the responsibilities and the levers are, right, to change the outcomes.
And if I may also to say, Raphael, is or to ask the candidates, why do they want to move into that role? Right? Because sometimes it's just the logical, what everybody expects next step, and it sounds bigger. But is it actually fulfilling for you to lead and be responsible for the P&L part and to be responsible for the engineering organization, et cetera, or does it turn out to be a burden? And I think we've seen many cases where this growth step was absolutely right, and people were very aware, or were not aware but still adjusted to it. But in other occasions or situations, it wasn't that fulfilling, and they sometimes moved to a narrower role again because it was closer to their heart and where they get their energy from, which I think is super important.
Yeah, I can relate to this even personally. You know, in my last job at Google, it was still called PM director or senior director, but I would say it was close to GM role in a way that we were. My manager had the full P&L, but I was running the merchant side of things in an e-commerce business. So basically, the folks that paid Google. So naturally, there was a lot of revenue responsibility, and this thing grew like crazy. And I would really say I both enjoyed this step up in that sense because I had never had more responsibility in my life for business. But at the same time, yes, be careful what you wish for. I wouldn't say that, it came with a cost, right? And came with a price. And I think I enjoyed those years, but it's, yes, it's exactly like, so you better know what you're getting into, right? With those steps. And yeah. Anything on Europe, Mark, in this context, like comparing what Anna said in the US and Europe, and any observations about that conversation?
I think not to add much, because simply we are a bit behind. So a lot of the clients we also have, I would say a lot of, let's say also private equity clients, which drive a lot of these product initiatives in private equity portfolio companies, look to the US and say, we want that. And then it's interesting, there are different levels then of how knowledgeable or educated they themselves are. So sometimes they're just picking up the trend without knowing the details. In other cases, they're actually very much in the details and have deep experience, depending on also the kind of investor setup. Is it's an American-driven fund of more knowledge? Others are just looking at the title. So overall, I think the same trends that Anna described, just with a bit of a time.
A little bit delayed. Yeah.
Question is, can we leapfrog, right? I think that's a big question. And in some cases, I think we can, but in others, I think we're just a step behind.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. So I would say let's do 5 more minutes, and then we already have a lot of questions in the chat. I love it. So to everyone, please prepare a few questions. I'm going to call you out in a minute, and then I'll moderate a bit and pick the questions, but then I would love you to speak up live and actually ask a question live to make it a bit more interactive. But before we go there, I thought we can maybe do 5-6 minutes, a bit more tactical stuff. that is maybe actionable for the folks, right? So any career advice, if you think about, you know, our audience here, which I would assume is mid-level PMs, senior PMs, lead PMs, but maybe most of them, I would assume, have not made this step yet, this kind of general management. Any strategic or tactical advice for those folks?
Yeah, I think one very practical is the one that you just called out, Raphael, is be careful what you wish for, right? What we discussed, the kind of understanding why you want to make the next step and what the implications are. I think another one is if you're going for a non-tech digital environment, right, a more traditional company or some company which only installs a product role now, think about how to talk about your career, right? For example, as mentioned earlier, I think many product managers, product leaders act actually across a large group of colleagues with engineering, etc., but they don't have them in their disciplinary responsibility. And I think it's important to make your audience aware, potential company aware, that you are actually influencing across a large part of the organization, what you're driving, etc. So think about how to simplify and to explain what you are actually doing and what you're responsible for, so just to start off.
So you're saying almost like you have to set the context to some extent yourself, maybe especially in Europe, because it's not a, you know, it's not a totally given in Europe that everybody understands the role. Yeah, makes sense. I would say. Anna, anything on your end? Any tips?
A couple things. I would definitely try to assess where a company is in its journey, not just digital maturity, but in being a product-led organization. So I think there's even little things that you pick up on in interviews, like what language are they using? Like, how are they describing their product development process? Like, are they saying agile? You know, do they understand user personas? And this is all sort of product 101, but it is interesting and telling if that is part of the common parlance in a company or not. Or even the idea of like rapid prototyping, does that come up? I think the other thing is to stay current. The market is moving so quickly. So it's interesting. Again, recent conversations, I've had several searches that are product that start to verge into just digital customer experience. So those things were actually together like maybe 5 years ago. And then I think COVID has brought them back together again. And it's because our experience with companies is profoundly digital right now, right? I think COVID has disrupted a lot of how we engage, how we buy, and sort of our participation in digital tools. So I've seen a lot of demand for product leaders that lead more towards like customer experience, digital journey, end-to-end digital experience. So that's something that is very topical. And right, if that's something that you had in the past, it's something to just jump onto because it is a hot trend right now. And just seek out others in the community. I think what's been great, just even in some of the sessions that we have moderated, particularly for me, kind of bringing together women in product is a passion of mine because it isn't a particularly big community, certainly in the States. But I think what was really lovely is in one of the first sessions, everybody just started finding each other and getting their own contact info, because I think to this point of even the question of kind of what are some of the misconceptions. It's so nice to have partner in crime in this and to have peers in other organizations that you can have for advice and sort of commiserate with even.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much. All righty. I would then say we have lots of questions in the chat. I love it. Please keep them going. And again, I will call you out in person now, and I will not necessarily go in order. I will just pick a few ones. So have them in the chat, and then please be ready. And actually, I love the one from Britt. Britt, if you're still on the call, I would love you to quickly just ask the question first.
Sure. Hi, Mark. Hi, Anna. It's nice to see you guys again. I actually worked with both of them at Egon Zehnder, so really excited to kind of catch up with them. But I would love to hear your kind of latest perspective on what characteristics have you guys seen that really helps distinguish a good product leader from a great product leader? And is there anything you've noticed when it comes to them becoming CEOs later on?
Do you want me to start, Mark?
Right. Why don't you start? I'm happy to build on.
Yeah. Oh, it's not such a hard question, Britt. Thanks for not the softball question. I think some of the things that I've seen that distinguish really great, like sort of the good to great journey, is one, right sizing the product process and tools and systems and organizations to where the organization is, right? I think the worst situation is when a product leader introduces processes that are not right sized to where the organization is in its own product journey. And I think we see this a lot, particularly in growing companies. You do have to sort of match sort of the phase of the company, the culture of the company, to sort of the product development process. I think the other thing is product leaders have to be exceptional communicators and exceptional advocates for their function. So I would say on the sort of good to great journey, being able to bring others on board. And in this exact point to the language that people use. All right, so your internal stakeholders may not use the same language, but how do you get them to speak your language? How do you get them to provide input and to feel, sort of that they participate in the product process? I think sort of this piece around collaborating, influencing, communicating at an exceptionally strong level, I think is very important. The last thing I'll add, and then Mark, please jump in, is I think being an exceptional team builder. So most organizations need to sort of refactor, upgrade, continue to develop their product function to the whole point that this market is moving so quickly. So I think an exceptional product leader really has to be able to build a team, to develop their current team, but also be able to find new team members, because I think this is one of those that you take to your, kind of HR business partner, and they're gonna be like, I don't know, right? So this whole point of we couldn't wrap our heads around product for a number of years until recently. And so I think, kind of great product leaders are able to sort of bring teams with them. Mark, what else would you add?
I would say on the good to great part is that they're actually curious and there's a real understanding of the areas beyond product and technology, right? So really acknowledging that once you are in the C-suite, you're expected to contribute beyond your area of direct responsibility and to move from this is my area, this is how can I think for the entire company. And from the ones where I've seen the move, for example, from CPO to CEO, as Britt, you asked the question, I think there the skill stay actually the same, so the great communication, but suddenly you have new stakeholders and audience. You need to interact more with your investors or your board. And suddenly you have a whole different level of not speaking the same language and a whole different level of having to learn maybe a new language to convey your message. So I think these are the building steps. So I would say everything that Anna said, plus then a new level once a new step is taken.
Wonderful. Krishna has an interesting question about assessing an organization. Krishna, do you maybe want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Maybe it's for Anna. I think you briefly touched on this, Anna, to see what language they are using. Often many organizations list a product manager role. So as much as organizations choosing good candidates choosing good organizations so that the journey is good. So how do we assess in top 3 or 4 categories that it's the right opportunity for us to go to? Thank you.
It's a very good question. We should develop a template. I'm literally putting it down in a poster right now. It's a good idea. Listen, top of mind, and again, Mark, please jump in also. I think it's, again, because I think product language may not always be familiar even to the person who's interviewing you. I think it's asking around the goals, like the 12-month, 24-month, 5-year timeline. What does success look like for this role, for the product function at large? I also think asking questions around where is the existing product expertise in the organization. So as a sort of bringing a tactical example, is we're working with a high growth software company right now, and product right now is embedded in the engineering function, right? So understanding where those resources are and how is that being approached today will give you a bit of an understanding. Mark, what would you add?
I would say another thing to test, and I think you can test it in interview rounds, is does the CEO, for example, have your back? Do they stand behind you? Are they willing to use the word fight, right? Fight the fights with you. Because sometimes you have, particularly depending on where product sits in the organization and how political partially an organization is, you need the power and time and willingness from the CEO to fight the battles with you. particularly if your organization, if you establish, is new, if the product organization is new within the company. So you can test for how have they solved conflicts in the past, how are conflicts solved currently in the company, and by asking different stakeholders, you might get a view on whether someone is, for example, avoiding direct conflicts, not going in, etc., etc. So I think that's another thing to test for.
I love that one. It's so important to have the CEO's backing, you know, and have the support. You're so lonely if the CEO doesn't help you as the product lead. All right, let's move on to Madhur. He has a question on business models and Europe versus US.
And thank you for that, Anna. Nice to see you. Thanks, Mark and Raphael, for hosting this. Probably a lot of things as you guys are talking about software companies versus non-digital native companies, correct? Like completely different world, bread and butter for software companies. So my question is more on non-software organizations. Many a times they think of product as, or digital, or pick your favorite term, as a way to digitize their existing business models. And they actually want to see the benefits in terms of top line growth to what they promise the street, FTSE dot, pick your index, and that doesn't happen. It requires a business model shift. And that is where, at least in my experience, there has been friction, because now you're running into the entrenched business model overall, and wondering what bold moves you've seen, what examples you've seen, what guidance do you have around that fundamental shift, because that takes time. That takes, people talk about cultural change. That is fundamental cultural change right in there.
I think it's a super important point, and I think one which is make or break for many businesses as such, right? Not just for the product or a digital leader coming in, but for the entire company. Where I see, and again, it's just maybe anecdotal examples. If there is a clear sense of ownership of a CEO or a founder or a family owner, even in a traditional business, you can sense, you can feel, I feel in your conversations with them, whether there's real conviction behind the efforts needed, or whether it's just, as I call it, a fig leaf exercise where you do digital because everyone does digital and you have to have a digital officer or something. So this can also be driven by an, again, investor, private equity or venture investor. I would say there, some, let's say, traditional, more cost restructuring focused, for example, private equity companies have a bigger difficulty to do these more radical moves, whereas experienced tech and growth investors are actually pushing it hard with their portfolio companies. So I think it's always about, is there a clear, you need a certain sense of risk taking and doing the hard calls and hard shifts. And if it's a very, for the lack of a better word, old school managerial, not taking ownership, more risk hedging and leveraging, kind of avoiding culture, then it will be very unlikely, I think, that they make these bold moves. So, but you, and it's probably, we should be able to put it into words, but it's probably the best thing that comes to mind is, if you feel them and you see them once you meet them in these conversations, you need to see and feel this conviction. And if you throughout an interview process, for example, really don't get this feeling, then it's probably a good indication that it's not there.
Perfect, thank you. Mario has sort of maybe a fitting question about empowerment, actually true empowerment. Maybe Mario, you can ask your question, please.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the word. Yeah, my question was in terms of, let's say, maturity on being product-led or not of your clients. My question was, do you have like a rough feeling how big are the shares of your clients clearly looking for a product executive to drive A, like feature factories, and B, the more mature organizations that have already empowered product teams? And what difference do you see in the markets there, like Anna versus Mark? Because also from Marty Kagan, you can hear that he sees like Europe also a lot behind the US here on that regard. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, I think great question. I would say currently it's they ask a lot for the empowered product teams. I'm not sure. I'm sometimes not sure whether it's just a trend word or whether they really already want that and know what that implicates and means. But I would say in most of the projects we're currently doing, that's what companies are looking for. That's what I would say. It hasn't been the case, and they couldn't, or they didn't use these words, or they didn't ask for it particularly a few years ago. So I think it's if I look at the last 12 months, I would say that's what I've heard most of the times. Anna, US?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there definitely is a little bit of a line between what they ask for and who they end up hiring and who they actually need. I would say generally, I think certainly in software, there's high sophistication and they're looking for much more kind of empowered product leaders. I think there's a little bit of a more challenging, blurry area in digital transformation industries, right? Where they're asking for a real empowered product leader, but what they're giving them to do is features. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. It doesn't mean that that will be that way forever. I would say in digital transformation companies, the onus is even more so on the product leader to educate. And it was interesting that this language came from a recent search that was actually in the data space, but I really liked that they said, educate on and advocate for. And that really to me underscores the importance of the product function. So I think particularly if you're hearing questions about like features without sort of context and strategy, it is an opportunity to educate on and advocate for, because I think ultimately everybody's kind of following this curve. It's a question of pace.
Yeah. I'm sorry that I cannot pick every single question. We have just too many. So if you don't mind, I'll just pick a final question from Eric, please. He has a specific B2C question.
Thank you, Raphael. Long time ago.
Oh, hey.
Good to see you and hear you. Now, my question was about B2C companies and then tech companies. Do you see any particular thing in there? And the reason that I ask is typically they're a little bit ahead of the rest. So if you see something happening over there, then it might drop to the other ones as well. So that was basically my question.
I think what I'm seeing is a lot more of a blurry line between product and customer experience underpinned by data. I think there's a bifurcation where I'm seeing some CPTOs in that space, but tech is actually becoming subservient to product because I think tech is becoming, although more technical, more commoditized in that space. But then I'm seeing this bigger sort of right-hand turn towards product leaders that are really aligned to customer experience, user experience, with owning the data teams, because I think so much of this is underscored by the data and analytics function, and that's what's going to bubble up the opportunities and allow you to experiment and to really be more user oriented. But I think that's the biggest thing I'm seeing is a slightly more user leaning, more data leaning, more customer leaning than technical.
Cool.
Mark, is that similar for you?
Similar, absolutely, I would say. And then one thing to add is maybe in the B2C overall space, so we're talking e-commerce, et cetera, I would say it's the same. So do we call it product? Do we call it customer experience? And then it's just a question if it's a, let's say, a tech company with a lot of build technology. I think it's one thing. And the other is, we've seen recently in the discussion, is it's actually, if it's an e-commerce company, it wasn't in the past necessarily about product, like we understand it as in digital product management, but more about the actual product and the supply side. And now moving to the whole customer experience side as a new thing. So that's what I would see there as a kind of on the consumer digital part.
If you take that one step further, the link with online marketing and actually how people actually land at your website is how do people tackle that? Have you seen something interesting there?
Yes. It's probably what I mentioned earlier, is that there's now for the first time that the CPO actually also is responsible for marketing. It doesn't mean that he or she is necessarily the deep domain expert, but because it's so intertwined and because some companies do not want them to fight and blame each other, they put it under one roof, and that is partially an answer to the point raised. Yeah.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I wish we could continue. We have more questions, but we can actually do another episode of this maybe at some point. I want to so much thank Mark and Anna for taking the time. I know you're very busy. You have big jobs and lots of responsibilities. So really, seriously, thank you so much. And this is not something I think people are exposed to every day. So wonderful. Thank you. And I just want to wrap up with a few other things. The one is, please remember the INSEAD program. If this is interesting for you, this is a program we've run now for a couple of years. It gets a really amazing NPS score. And we have a mix of, we have an INSEAD professor, Noah, who has been running this for a long time, and product leaders, senior product leaders from all sorts of companies coming in. And for the first time, actually, we do it in San Francisco now as well. So in Fontainebleau, San Francisco, and at other occasions we do it in Singapore. So it's quite an international program. You get an INSEAD certificate. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to call out, like I mentioned, Peak Product is as sort of the holding brand of our initiatives, is actually also offering advice and consulting, like in a boutique consulting sense for CEOs, for CPOs, for product teams. I'm actually leading this myself. I'm doing projects. So if this is of use for you, feel free to reach out to me and the company. And last but not least, the next session is already in actually a couple of weeks. And we have Amit from Get Your Guide, who's one of the largest travel and trip companies, and trip activities companies, heavily funded. KKR is a lead investor. And Amit himself has actually been through this MD to CPO product to executive role a couple of times. He's a very seasoned business lead, and I'm very happy and curious to interview him already in a few weeks. So feel free to sign up there at the link at the bottom or on the homepage of the Product Management Festival. So with that, really, thank you so much. This is wonderful. I enjoyed this a lot, and on to another session, and see all of you soon, and stay safe. Goodbye.